Something that I keep thinking back to since therapy earlier this week that I didn't mention on here was we talked about the idea of believing you were complicit in your trauma, and how that gives a lot of power to the traumatic situation and how that causes a lot of additional problems. And my understanding is that most childhood trauma comes back to attachment in some way or another. And because of attachment, kids are really prone to blaming themselves or finding some narrative or some explanation other than my mom can't meet my needs or my dad has these problems that have nothing to do with me. Kids find some way to blame themselves because it would be so scary for them to think that their parents just aren't capable of being the parents that they need to be. My assumption is that kids are kind of prone to feeling complicit in general. But then in my situation, at least with some of my trauma, I was handed guilt in a very explicit way. So like with the sexual harassment stuff of my stepdad, he would regularly share his beliefs of how it was actually our fault. He would make an inappropriate comment about our bodies, and then if there was any sort of ugh or anything said, his response would be something like, well, what do you expect when you wear clothes like that? What do you expect when your jeans are that tight? How do you expect me to not notice your boobs when you're wearing a shirt that has a logo across the chest? I had a good therapist as a teenager, and I know that I did not share the details of how I was being talked to at home with him, and I've wondered why. Because I don't think I understood that it was that it was as serious as it was. I really had genuinely minimized it in my head. I wouldn't have thought that it would be something that a mandated reporter like a therapist would have to report, although I now think it actually is. But I didn't believe that as a kid. And so why then didn't I tell my therapist at the time? I think that complicity is part of that. I don't think I felt at all worthy of getting away from that because I thought it was my fault that it was happening to begin with. Even though most of me knew I was doing everything I could to dress in ways that would reduce this mistreatment of me and to change my behaviors. I wouldn't jump on a trampoline when he was around because I knew that that was something that he would really utilize in a creepy way as an excuse to talk about bodies, moving around and jiggling and things like that. So I knew that, at least a lot of me knew that I was doing everything I could to get him to stop. I was trying really hard to hide my body and just not move my body in ways that would catch his eye. And it did reduce it some, but it never stopped it because it wasn't real. It was never about my clothing at all. It was just the fact that I had a body. That really is all that it came down to. I don't know, I think part of me did know that it was just my body. It's just being a preteen and young teen girl that caused this. But yet, it was still this idea that well, what do you expect from men? It was well, men are dogs. And so somehow it's still your fault. And I think some of this stuff is really why I find myself interested in and relating to purity culture, even though I did not grow up in purity culture in the sense of attending a church that really preached modesty or things like that within our family home kind of a way, was still just really taught that girls having bodies is a problem for men, and it's their responsibility to try to control the behavior of men, because men can't be expected to control themselves. But I also just have found this interesting in that, like, as I'm looking at various forms of trauma or like different people's stories, I'm kind of looking at like how either were they actually complicit or did they just feel complicit, and how did that cause them to feel alone in it, feel unworthy of help, or kind of keep them stuck. And I definitely do see the pattern. So I don't know, I just thought it's interesting to kind of look for how complicity factors into different traumas.